Good afternoon, and welcome to our Dovetails event for Imagined Spaces. This is a wonderful new anthology which has been brought out by Kirsty Gunn and Gail through their Voyage Out press. I'll just tell you what they say about it, which is why it's such a wonderful anthology for Dovetails. Here is a project only of inclusions, where the intersections of gender, race, and economies all might meet, in a space that is expansive, in writing that breathes, is charged with hesitations, beauty, pleasure, that reads to think and to write some more. So, Kirsty, can you tell me what was the genesis of this book?
Well, Jean, Gail and I have had long, happy and productive hours talking with each other about learning and writing within the academy and also outside, and feeling that our young people don't have the kinds of opportunities to really learn to be at home with their own intelligence through their own writing. That there's so much about the essay form that is taught at schools and at universities that's constrictive, that holds back individual thinking. And we wanted to bring something to our teaching that would have this expansive breathing quality, as you just read from the introduction. And we wanted to give a space for thinking. So we started a series of workshops and discussions. And then, Gail, you came up with this wonderful concept, didn't you, of Imagined Spaces as a title?
Yes, I think it was partially to do with how scunnered I was, and still am, with how everything is managed for us. You know, our teaching is managed. We're kind of told essentially how to perform our teaching. Our students come to ask us, what do you want? All of our pedagogical teaching, university life, research life seems to be managed according to a fairly rigid, I think maybe, template of ideas or ways of performing or ways of thinking or ways of writing, essentially, for the research assessment exercises that we actually have to do as part of our teaching contract. We have little kind of pro forma tick boxes for things that we have to accomplish in our teaching grid. So my sense is, let's have something that actually subverts that. Let's have a title in which we can actually imagine much more expansive ways of thinking and working, and just journeying in words, journeying in research, journeying in reading and actually writing, in order to write and read some more. So that was kind of the start of where we were right at the start when we thought about it. So I did say, instead of having something empirical, instead of saying to a grant awarding body, let's do this and this and this, and this can be measured and that can be measured, and this will be the outcome and this will be the output. Let's have a space where we just simply start with the sense of being able to do things and create things. So that's how we were when we first started.
I think that's Kirsty said something that really struck a chord with me in the introduction, that sense of being managed all the time. And she said, where is being human now that we've all been skyjacked and remade as professionals? And I think that's very pertinent. It kind of stops that element of play that is so interesting in the essay form, I think.
And what was really lovely, Jean, was the way that sense of frustration that Gail and I felt. We have officers that sit next to each other, and we're constantly in and out of, or we were before the pandemic, constantly in and out of each other's offices, you know, feeling this sense of rage and frustration and powerlessness. What was so lovely about starting to think about imagined spaces and about essaying and about a different kind of way of teaching is that we became really happy.
Yes, we were. I mean, it's not to trash the empirical sciences or kind of the social sciences.
Let's.
But it's no, it's to do with the humanities. We are in the humanities, we are in the arts. This is where we're situated in. And it was just a sense that why can't we start to imagine possibilities rather than always being told, here's a little box you have to sit in.
Yeah, it's very much a tick box culture now, isn't it? You get a survey even if you buy something off Amazon. You know, you've got to. I believe you're going to read a bit from the introduction for us. Shall we give people
Thanks, Jean. Yes, we would. And we're going to read together. Perhaps Gail and I should explain that we ourselves, as editors and publishers of this volume, are sharing with our readers a new kind of essaying that we like to think we've sort of created together, don't we, Gail? Which is to share the first person and to write as two people from the one I.
do you mean the one I as in first person or I as in I? What one sees with? I suppose the two things are kind of similar in a way, aren't they? That you're sharing a vision.
I mean, I suppose it comes from our interest in language and how the first person is a kind of porous pronoun, because when you read something, you inhabit that space essentially. And that started us thinking about how writing can be a collaborative enterprise. It doesn't have to be simply the property of, you know, of a particular writer or a particular individual at any one time, so that we can inhabit the first persons. And we do inhabit the first persons as we read. And so it was a bit of an experiment thinking about how to write collaboratively with someone inhabiting that first person pronoun. And it was also the back of my mind. I thought, the ref people will come to me, and they have come to me, which bit of the essay is yours and which bit is Kirsty's, in that kind of carving up of property rights over intellectual property rights and research property rights in that particular essay. And I just said, well, actually, we've written it collaboratively, which we have.
And I bet you've forgotten which bit you wrote by now, probably.
I mean, well, that's the really lovely thing about it, Jean, is that we have. And the experience of learning to share writing and to give up this notion of ownership of ideas, as Gail just said, which has become, you know, everything has become commodified. Intellectual activity is now a commodity. Which bit is Gail's? Which bit is Kirsty's? We've defied that process by sharing this first person. And in the practice of this kind of writing, we really have given up that idea of ownership. We really genuinely can't now, going back through the various essays we've written, remember who's done what. Yeah. And it's been part of this really joyous process of rebelling against certain kinds of strictures and norms that seem to be hemming us in more and more in our contemporary lives.
Yes, very, very much so. And of course, you have a number of dialogues in the book between people discussing the use of space, for example, or the idea of the North, which actually interested one of our Dovetails members very much, because of the idea of, we all think of the North as this very serene, beautiful place, but of course there's been great numbers of conflicts, and the Vikings came from the North and were extremely aggressive and so on. So will you read a little bit from the introduction?
Okay, Kirsty, just start us off.
Mm-hmm. Here is a beginning, a possible, barely delineated way into an imagined space.
We had been sitting and talking all day about essays.
Yes, that is a nice way to start. A sentence to set there at the top of the page, beyond which lies the introduction to the rest of the book you now hold in your hands.
That begins. We had been sitting and talking all day about essays. We had been talking, not debating or arguing. We were musing, thinking aloud, asking questions, enjoying the back and forth of conversations, the gifting of ideas and hypotheses that is the stuff of conversations. Essays.
We were discussing reading, writing, and teaching essays and how we were to introduce this book, how to talk about the particular and distinctive collection of pieces that follows here. Who might these be for, we asked. What sort are they, the essays gathered together in this book? And what's so interesting about an essay anyhow, that they should comprise an entire collection? Essays are for schools or universities, aren't they? Why might anyone want to read a whole book of them or find that an enabling and life-affirming thing to do?
To clear my head, I thought to walk across the river on the road bridge, opened more than 50 years ago, connecting Dundee to Newport-on-Tay in Fife. An engineering triumph that opened in 1966, a bridge that is roughly 1.4 miles in a straight line, made from 42 concrete spans, supporting a concrete slab on which two dual carriageway roads are laid. Situated in between the two roads is an elevated central walkway for pedestrians and cyclists, flanked by protective railings and lampposts on either side. The Tay Bridge is necessary to the lives of daily commuters, to the cyclists or occasional walkers who pass each other with a friendly nod of acknowledgement. Off I went then on this walk in the early evening light.
Making a journey, I suppose you might call it. Yes, that's it exactly. That I'm forming a kind of trajectory in my thinking as I walk my way across this wide connection, a bridge, with one piece of land behind me, another up ahead, writing as I go, moving forward in ideas and words, an essay on foot this. With the conversation from before, the things we were discussing earlier, turning over in my mind as I continue to walk a line, with the surge and charge of the water below, quietening now as the spring tide turns. Seeing as I go, along with the title of this introduction, the opening line, and the one after that, and after that, all following me as I take one step and then another step. Nothing in writing is left behind.
Can we leave it there?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Listen to that all day. It's a very interesting collection, and one for Dovetails, one of the most interesting essays was by Di John, who is an ex-soldier. I'm going to introduce Di now. He now does a great deal of work for charities. Are you there, Di?
I am, yes. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect.
How did that come about, that, you know, what is basically a very liberal collection of essays included an essay by an ex-soldier?
Well, the short answer is I was propositioned by Gail.
Oh.
I think I mentioned to Gail, we were rowing on the river, and I mentioned in discussion that I have for many years kept a journal. And I've also had an interest in writing. And so the two things kind of came together. And Gail invited me to consider writing a piece for this anthology, which we discussed at some length, and which I was very happy and pleased to attempt to do. And I have to say, Jean, that I did have a wry smile when I found myself included in a collection of liberal essays, because I've always considered myself to be something of a liberal, and so I didn't see any necessary distinction or confliction between those two concepts.
Well, yes, I mean, one of the interesting things in your essay for Dovetails is your concept of the army being a force for good. And that, of course, raises all sorts of questions of a just war and so on, which people struggle with, I think, because the natural human instinct is to defend yourself. And yet we are engaged in these wars all over the world now, which are laying waste to whole countries.
Yes. I mean, I think the first thing to say really is that members of the military, certainly in the UK, are inherently apolitical. So when we talk about engaging in armed conflict wherever, it's always as a consequence of a political decision made via a democratic process. So I suppose the question would be why people choose to involve themselves in those activities. They don't choose what wars are fought, but by definition, a volunteer military is full of men and women who have made the decision and self-selected to be there. So I guess that's where the personal choice element comes in. Once you are a member of the armed forces, then essentially you go where you're sent, or as I've mentioned in my piece, often people ask to be sent because it's the old cliche about why would you spend your entire life engaged in piano practice and never get a chance to play before an audience, as it were.
Yes.
I think what's so exciting about having Di included in Imagine Spaces is that it opens all of us up to this space of imagining and thinking about what it is to be in a space of battle and that space of conflict. And it seems to me that the essay is the most wonderful form for letting us ask questions and bring in all of these debates and uncertainties that come with all of the decisions we make, political and martial, and give a space to think about that and to humanize it and to bring it into the space of humanitarian thinking and the imagination.
I'd just like to add, I've read the essay, and I can see that it's actually about a peacekeeping mission, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I think that's a really important distinction to make. And I suppose there are gradations of that, and there's what's called peace support, which is maintaining a state of peace, and then there's peace enforcement, which is something of a euphemism for making things peaceful. And I think the distinction I would make is that speaking sort of generically, the military aims to avoid fighting. I think if you find yourself fighting the other guys, something has gone wrong. The whole idea is to encourage them not to fight you, and ideally to get them to run away. And I think that whole concept of deterrence, which is itself a sliding scale, is the key to this. I think, as a rule, military people would much rather not engage in armed conflict because it's not something that you would ever wish upon anybody. But it's there as a last resort should all other avenues become exhausted.
The other thing, just to kind of butt in some ways, just to go back to what Jean has, Jean's original question really about how you came on board. I mean, I was very keen to have something outside my understanding, essentially, and so to have an essay on being at war or being in the military, and also thinking about civilian life alongside military life was quite an interesting kind of proposition in some ways, although I wouldn't have used the word proposition myself. Just thinking outside our ken, outside our understanding in some ways. I mean, we all live domestic everyday lives, and so the whole idea of being in a conflict zone was completely out of my range of experience. So I thought it was really important to have something that pushes us, or pushes me, pushes our kind of, pushes us to think quite carefully, the whys and the what fors and all of those kinds of discussions, including, I suppose, also that what your essay did was to bring the idea of juggling your domestic life with, if you like, your military life.
I think that's a really good point, Gail. And I think that what emerged for me was that juxtaposition of a life in a deployed operation where you are in very close proximity to other people, and you have a relationship there which is akin to married life at home in some respects, and then you have this cutoff point between that life and your life back at home. And having had this published, a number of people have come to me and said, I know exactly what you mean, because I was a seafarer, or I worked offshore in the North Sea, or even I was a traveling lecturer, and therefore I spent a lot of time away from home. And so it isn't an experience unique to the military, though perhaps it's rather more extreme in some respects, because the intensity of life when you're away is perhaps greater than in some other walks of life. So therefore the contrast is perhaps that much greater.
Mm. You were going to read us a little extract from the essay, Di, just to give people a flavour.
Sure, thank you. This is about 5 minutes. I hope that's not too long. And I'll read some paragraphs from page 160. My essay is called Between the Lines. And by way of a bit of background, this is just after arriving in Kosovo, in Pristina, during, as you've said, a peace support operation in 1999, so some years ago now. There is no obvious danger here. We had heard desultory fire earlier during the patrol and had gone through the motions of taking cover, conducting actions on, including searching for the fire's point of origin through the night sights on our rifles, doing a head count and sending in a report. The brief frisson of contact wasn't intended for us. We had made our way through the darkened ruins of the village with caution. There had been no reports of unexploded ordnance or improvised explosive devices, IEDs, in this area, but the residual risk that there might be was enough to keep us on hard surfaces only and to steer clear of the debris strewn around. But here, in this cellar, is nothing more hazardous than broken glass and the detritus of subsistence living, now twisted or shattered by the intense heat of the fire that has blackened the walls and that is still lingering acridly in the back of my throat. Had the family sought refuge from the bombs in this place before they died? Or worse, had they been driven down here deliberately? It doesn't matter now, for here they are, all 5 of them, it looks like, huddled into a tangle in the far corner. We stand in silence, nothing to say, before Ben's second in command, Sergeant Tony Blackman, calls in a situation report on the radio, then mutters, "Animals." He means the Serbs. Looking back, the Kosovo operation represented the kind of decisive, fundamentally well-intentioned military intervention based on a broad consensus that I had envisaged being a part of, unfettered by the Cold War's bipolar inertia and emboldened by comparative success of multinational intervention in Kuwait in 1991, the UK's military was to become a force for good. For us, at the time, it was the chance to go on ops, and I had been quick to stake my claim. It has to be me, I thought. Who else has the right combination of training and experience? Once selected, my team and I had relished the sense of being bit part players on a broader stage than we were used to. When the TV news described the deployment of British forces on the K4 mission, we could say, yes, we're on the Pristina airfield recce team, and no, we're not expecting trouble, but, you know, things on the ground are never the same as the intelligence reports. We'll be fine. In the UK military, a kind of equity card system applies to volunteers for operations. You can't go unless you've been before, and this subsequently worked for me when operational tours in Iraq and then Afghanistan were in prospect. My journey here had ostensibly begun more than a decade earlier. A convergence of factors, foremost amongst them a growing disillusionment with the routine of a career in corporate London, and the sense of purpose and shared achievement I gained from the challenges of part-time soldiering, ultimately led me to a career in uniform. In reality, though, and more prosaically perhaps, I started on this journey much earlier than that. Turning over my earliest memories, it isn't difficult to discern a pattern of its origins in my father's reminiscences of his time in the army. As an 18-year-old in early 1945, he had been old enough just to have been called up. And like many of his generation, his subsequent life had inevitably been shaped by the experience and aftermath of the Second World War. As a child in the late 1960s and early 70s, I remember that the war still permeated countless aspects of life, from popular boys' comics to the bomb sites glimpsed from railway carriage windows on rare trips to London, and from friends' dads who had waded ashore at first light on D-Day or fought in the jungles of Burma. For my boyhood friends and me, it was an article of faith, one of which we often reminded each other, that Raymond Baxter, dashing presenter of BBC Tomorrow's World, had been a Battle of Britain Spitfire pilot. We were almost right. He spent the summer of 1940 in Canada learning to fly, though his later wartime exploits more than justified our devotion. But the war had ended less than 3 decades previously and remained a tangible presence in our lives. My father was an enthusiastic member of the Territorial Army, who on returning from weekend camp would leave at my bedside gifts of old items of uniform for me to find the following morning. Or once, oh joy, gave me a thrillingly deafening ride to school in a roaring, bucking jeep borrowed from his regiment. That's what being a dad meant, and it seemed to me that a life devoid of uniforms, ritual, order, excitement, and jeeps was a life unfulfilled. The route subsequently described by my own experiences led, perhaps inexorably, from initial officer training and the acquisition of skills gained through specialist training and employed for real whenever the opportunity presented itself, to the wreckage of a distant airfield in the company of people I yet scarcely knew, but whose presence validated our shared purpose there.
Thank you very much. And I think what is very interesting for Dovetails as a charity is what you're describing as not just the culture around you, also a family culture, which so although you've stressed in the essay a lot of personal choice, there's also a lot of factors outside that lead people to become, to join the military, I guess.
Yes, I think so, Jean. I think it's just the way things were in those days. And looking back, for those of us who can, over the passage of decades, I think that the world did reflect that sort of post-war calm. Really, it seems a much simpler world looking back on it, and all of that culture that we absorbed of those Second World War films, often made in the 1950s and early 60s. People like Neville Shute and Alistair MacLean and so on were writing a fictionalized version of the war, which people, I think, chose to assimilate as real, notwithstanding their own experiences would have been, I suspect, very different from the idealized portrayals that popular culture tended to create in that post-war period.
Very, very much so. And they were on every Saturday afternoon, those black and white films. I do remember that. Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a very fascinating thing for us because, of course, Dovetails, one of our aims is to challenge the sort of militarization of the culture, which I think is getting stronger all the time. And, Hollywood movies are all these action movies and superheroes who are barely even human anymore, so it's been going on a long time, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Do you feel, I don't want to monopolize this, but do you feel, Jean, that it's to do with the normalization of violence as opposed to the military per se? Because I think the armed forces, in my experience, is pretty much full of pacifists. Not idealists, but pacifists. And I think that what we're seeing is perhaps the brutalization of popular culture in some regards, which is perhaps a different topic, but it's certainly one that I've noticed.
Yes, well, I certainly think so. And obviously it's something that concerns us a lot. And what we're trying to do is use the arts to oppose that. But when the dominant culture is this very macho, and as I say, barely human thing that's going on, And people, because of technology, are able to inflict all sorts of damage, you know, just zap people and so on. And it makes it look a simple matter. But yes, it was a most interesting essay, and very interesting to hear your own experience about that. And
thank you very much, Jean. That's very kind of you.
And Jean, can I also weigh in at this point and say that, again, this is why the essay form itself is so valuable in our contemporary world, because it does provide this kind of space which counters those certain polarities that exist, particularly in popular culture, but also in our politics and in our media in general. That we have this space where questions can be left hovering in the air, and where there's the sure answer that there is no sure answer. And then all we can do is continue to think and imagine and debate. I
think that's absolutely right. And one of the essays actually, it talks about this, Philip Lopate's discussion of the essay as a form, and he says, this is not for the barricades. It's a stroll through someone's mazy mind. And we all have mazy minds. We might get to the barricades as we do on the keyboard or whatever, but you know, everybody has doubts. Everybody has, you know, you can contain opposing thoughts in one person, really, can't you? So you and Gail have just made it flesh, really. I'm going to talk now about another essay, and we have the writer here too, Megan Delahunt. This starts with the concept of Suganruhe, which is a kind of restlessness before a long journey. And in this case, it's an essay about death, but it's an essay about so much more, actually, about loss of status and so on, about letting go. And I think you've defined it as death is the outer reaches of imagined spaces. Can Megan come in here?
Yeah, hello everyone.
Megan's a novelist and has written many things, and she's also worked with people in a hospice.
Yeah.
Are you there, Megan?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Great. Thank you for having me. Yes. As Jean says, it starts, the essay starts off, I mean, one of the things I love about essays, they can start off in one place and leave you beached on a further shore somewhere else. So I start off with my mother's death and noticing the fluttering of her hands and the way her pulse is racing, and wondering where she's going to. And then I took that, you know, that concept of Suganruhe, which is the German word for restlessness, that the poet Ruth Pardell had talked about this, that migratory birds start getting restless before a long journey. And then I was applying that to death. And not only, you know, I guess I've seen quite a few people die now, and also, yeah, just those kind of experiences. And I guess the last 5-6 years I've worked in hospices as a creative writing tutor, which is just, I feel that is my calling in life. You know, I just love it. I love that kind of work with people facing the end of their lives, with bereaved children, families. I really love that sort of work. And I've witnessed that with quite a few people now, that you know, where are they going? What kind of journey is this on? And I guess that led me into, as Jean says, it's all about loss, and that as we go through life, really, it's a slowing off of everything until it's just us, you know, in our own struggle, in the way that we struggle to be born. I think there's a struggle to die and to have a good death too. So I guess I was looking at all that. And of course, I come up against notions of what death is in our culture. And we're talking a lot about commodification and all the things that go with that. And there's a lot of denial with commodification, isn't there? You know, death distraction, I call it. We're constantly distracted by, you know, buying things and everything. You know, I'm as distracted as anyone else. Netflix, I love it, all that stuff. And, you know, we're distracted from our own mortality. Other cultures have other non-Western cultures, and even within the Western, you know, the Western world, there's differences, which I'll talk about when I come to read. But, you know, it's kind of, what are other ways of seeing death? And then, of course, this led me to a piece that Jean wants me to read, which is about Damien Hurst's shark, you know, and that when we think of death and dying in the West, one of the things that came to mind was Damien Hurst's famous shark artwork, you know, and why is that a representative of death, and what's the meaning of that? You know, I found out that it was a female shark, all this sort of thing, a female shark from my part of the world where I grew up, you know.
Which makes it very personal, I can tell.
It made it very personal, yeah, a shark in her middle years, you know. facing her own mortality, you know. I found all of that really powerful. And then I, you know, start looking at other cultural ways and other ways other artists, non-Western artists have dealt with it. And a lovely artist called Motoi Yamamoto, who works with salt and salt sculptures and installations that, of course, you know, they just wash away at the end. And he encourages everybody to come and take handfuls of salt at the end of his installations and send them back into the sea, you know. And that is such a different view of loss and also of death than in our culture.
And again, it kind of connects back to what Kirsty was saying about ownership and so on. And this book is about sharing, and you use that wonderful image of the sand mandalas that Tibetan monks make, and then terribly intricate. I think we've all seen those wonderful sort of very detailed patterns that they make, but then they just let them go. They just let them wash away, which is a very beautiful concept. Not all of us can manage it yet, but it is a lovely concept. Would you like to read the extract, Megan?
It's 4 minutes. I think Kirsty and Jean said 4 minutes, so I timed it this morning. We'll see. And Jean requested that I speak about the shark. So just a couple of paragraphs about the shark. How do we imagine death in the developed West? I close my eyes, and what comes to mind is a shark in a blue vitrine, jaws open. The physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living is Damien Hurst's famous artwork. More Steven Spielberg than Barnett Newman, as critic Luke White once noted. The shark as a threat is familiar to me from my Australian childhood. Every summer, the shark nets at the beach, the shark sirens and helicopters, the dark sightings of dark fins. The shark in Damien Hirst's blue tank was once sinuous, alive, a big fish in blue waters. Is the best part of this artwork its title? I think so. Even then, the title could do with an edit. The shark sculpture I saw at the Tate in 2012 looked terrifying, as if it was still moving, as if it could swim right through the glass, barreling through the blue water and smashing the tank, threatening a flood across the gallery floor. But other things about this sculpture also bothered me then. They bother me still. Hurst's vitrine offers us a very Western view of death as something other and primal, something animal, something which takes us in its teeth and will not let us go. This is not the only conception of death in the world, but it dominates the Western Judeo-Christian tradition, resurrection and an afterlife notwithstanding. There's both a fear and a denial of death prevalent in 21st century Western culture. This generalization comes with caveats. In Ireland in Mediterranean Europe, in Latin America, there is more of an acceptance of death in life, outlets for grieving and mourning that anyone who has ever sat through Irish wakes, as I have, and vigils for the dead, Mexican Day of the Dead celebrations, grief rituals in Greece or Italy can attest. That shark. I keep worrying at the image. I keep wanting to break it out of the vitrine. Hurst's first shark sculpture, after only 2 years, had begun to disintegrate in its tank in London's Saatchi Gallery. The gallery in 1993 decided to gut the shark and stretch it over a frame, which made the shark seem less real and more cartoonish. Hurst wasn't happy. Saatchi then decided that he wanted to sell the sculpture to a hedge fund manager, and Hurst offered to replace the shark for this new owner. And so a new shark was caught off the coast of Australia, a female tiger shark in her middle years, and shipped in formaldehyde to Hurst on a 2-month journey by sea. Yet there's something off here, which I keep circling around, female sharking around, the inability to let nature be, to turn everything that is not white, male, profitable, wealthy, into the other. Something about the pursuit of this second female shark from my part of the world, and in her prime, the shark I saw in the Tate, gets to me. That she was female and hunted to death to order, trafficked for rich men's pleasure, and then put on display. Such acts can only be considered abuse. A perfect metaphor for death then. But I reject the shark as a Western metaphor for the unimaginable, for death. For such an association seems to close down an imaginative space rather than opening one up. The tiger shark herself is now identified as a species near threatened. The female shark, hunted and then shunted to the West, is an image of ecocide and femicide, not death as such. It is rather a very specific image conjured up at a very specific time by a certain white male artist, himself a product of late patriarchal capitalism. Might death be imagined in another way, as a release into the next stage of life, another bardo state, rather than as a terrifying other? We must imagine differently.
I love how that ends. We must imagine differently.
Yeah. The whole book is just full of these wonderful journeys, isn't it? You know, I mean, Megan starts off with her mother's death and ends up with Damien Hurst in a middle-aged shark, having gone through, you know, sand Mandelas and all the rest. So it's yeah, that she has gone through that journey from her mother's death, through working in the hospice, to these beautiful images of sand mandalas and salt sculptures, and ending up with Damien Hurst and capitalism and female sharks. And so it is a wonderful form, the essay, and particularly in this book where you're using it to explore, I think. And that was obviously your intention.
Mm.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, it's great. I think the essay it's great fun.
Yeah.
Doing that, you know, and to see the mazy mind, you know, Philip Lepart's, you know, and to follow your own mazy mind. That's what I love about it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we do that in fiction too, but this is different. I can feel a different part of my brain actually working when I'm working with non-fiction, because it's still it's very creative and it feels very alive.
Yes.
But you're following, actually, you're tracking your own mind and allowing yourself to track your own mind. And so, yes, you can start off with your mother's death. You can go through all these things. You can talk about capitalism. You can, and then I think, you know, the final scene is me working in the hospice with a mother who's dying, and I'm doing family work. You know, I'm working with her young daughter who, and then the dying woman and her daughter and her ex-husband and myself, we're all creating stories about their life.
Yeah.
In the last days of their mother's life, you know, and what a joy that was, and how, you know, those experiences give you, wow, you know, such an idea that we can be, what I've learned through all of that is, you know, we are creative beings up until our last breath. You know, we are so creative if we give ourselves permission and we allow everyone else around us to have that permission. And I think, you know, Kirsty and Gail have given us permission with this group of essays too.
And Megan, you came to one of our many essay and conversations when we had our Imagine Spaces Day at the Royal Society in Edinburgh. And I wonder if you could describe to everybody that sense that Jean talked about at the beginning, that this book of essays is also a place for conversation, because there were such conversations that began and started to be woven together in that day when you all came together and shared your essays and so on.
It was so exciting. Yeah, I think I was on a high for about a month after that, you know, a natural high. It was so, yeah, just to have a group of people. And I think at that stage we'd almost finished our drafts, but they were still in draft form, you know, pretty much nearly final drafts. So that's always a bit scary too, that you're essaying your essay, you know, and just people's responses to things was so, and just the range of all of us who could be there. I don't think Di could be there for that one, but it was just so exciting to have that as also a way of making a book all together. And I think so then it becomes a collaborative effort as well. You know, it's
I think that's a marvelous idea to do that. I've never heard of that.
It was really terrific. It was really terrific. I've had one other experience like that, but again, it was very different. And that was a project called Lock Computer that brought together artists and scientists. But this was, just, you know, all of us doing different things and all of us brought together and the conversations, and it was just such fun. Yeah, my mind was buzzing for a long time. I think all of us were, you know, very buzzy after it.
I think it was also really convivial, and it was genuinely a moment or a space for exchange, because often I go to academic conferences and they're all about how clever you are, you know. So it was really nice to be pushed, and it was really nice to think on your feet, and it was really nice to be challenged, and actually in a way that was friendly and kind.
It's very different to academic, you know, well, I think to be a good writer, you have to let go of all those ideas about cleverness. It's not about being the clever clogs in the room. You know, it's actually not. Mario,
Can I just add, your essay, I think, was also extremely brave, and in some ways difficult to read because it's facing death, you know. That's meant as a compliment, by the way. I'm not saying it's.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah, I mean, there's a section there that I think a lot of writers and so on have responded to, you know, where I talk about feelings of failure and feelings of, you know, loss, and you know, at the time when I was writing it too, I was physically immobile because I couldn't walk because I was having had to have a hip replacement. So, you know, at that time I had a novel that was not published, that I'd spent years on. My mother had died a few years before. I was unable to walk. I mean, there was all these things, you know, that all of these losses in life, they bring us face to face with the ultimate loss, you know, and learning to deal with those, I hope will make that ultimate loss of our lives and the people around us a little bit easier to understand, because we're going through all those things all the time, you know. So yeah, thank you, Mario. I don't know that it's particularly brave. It was just what was happening, you know. I was a witness to my own feelings of failure and loss, I think, and mortality. Yeah.
Well, it's a very powerful essay. In fact, the whole book is really, really powerful, and I'd like to thank Kirsty and Gail and Di and you, Megan, for taking part today. I'll just read you something written by one of the writers, Linda Chown, and she says, the essay is a floating place which gets to be filled in by the writer or reader. It is thus a beautiful adventure. And that, for me, is what Imagined Spaces is. And I would recommend you all to read it. Thank you all very much for coming, and do read the book. Thank you.
Thank you.